Well, excellent. Man, you put me as the
Uh-oh, we
last.
can't hear you.
Well, I'm unmuted. Yes, no.
I can hear her.
Can everybody else hear?
Okay, I'm getting the
It's just
thumbs
me?
up. Okay. So I was just gonna say you put me as the last thing before
Oh my gosh.
lunch.
I'm so sorry. I have my earphones. I didn't have my earphones in.
Well, at least it was a simple solution instead of like a complicated technological, because knowing my
This is-
luck, that would be that.
So that doesn't shock me, but thank you and welcome.
All right. Good morning, everybody. I am Regina Carrico. I will be the incoming VP for PATH, which is the People Against Trafficking Humans Coalition of Kentucky. As my big kid job, I am a paramedic for St. Matthew's Fire and Rescue. Let's see if I can get this right. I had a practice run with showing presentations yesterday. So everybody see the first slide?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. I don't see your faces anymore with the version of Zoom that I have. So, all right, everybody, I want to be conscientious of your time, so let's get started. So we're going to talk about a couple of different things, the problem and definitions. We're going to examine who, where, and how, identification, screening, and interventions, some role of court designated workers and everybody, and then we're going to have a call to action at the end. So it is indeed a global problem. The crime of human trafficking or trafficking of persons affects virtually every country and region in the world. Victims are trafficked along a multitude of trafficking flows within countries, between neighboring countries, or across different continents. The manifestations of human trafficking are multifaceted and fluctuate across geographical locations and within ethnic and cultural groups within these regions. We have a current estimate that it's about 41 million children and adults are victims of human trafficking across the globe annually. I would say this is probably a lower number because not every crime or human trafficking crime is reported. Victims of these crimes are vulnerable, oppressed, and living in poverty. These factors, coupled with the ongoing demand for labor and sex services, fuels the success of the human trafficking industry. Most agree that since vulnerabilities such as job losses, food insecurity, lack of housing have increased for many humans globally and in the United States, there's also been a risk for becoming a human trafficking victim. Research after other major crises, natural disasters such as Hurricane Katrina, the Haiti earthquake, and the tsunami in Indonesia in 2004 do reveal increased occurrences. So as we can say, since we've all spent the last year and a half in a pandemic, you better believe that the increases of incidents have increased as well. So in the United States, human trafficking is the exploitation of another individual for labor and or commercial sex through the use of force, fraud, and coercion. Human trafficking happens in all regions of the US, including rural, urban, and suburban settings, taking place in a wide range of both licit and illicit industries. Human trafficking in the United States is occurring within flourishing, profitable businesses. So this is your street online prostitution, escort services, domestic servitude, and other industries like those listed, and generates illegal profits in the billions of dollars in the United States and international economies. So this is connected to every other societal problem such as poverty, child maltreatment, gender violence, dislocation, etc. So as I mentioned, these are the three actions typically used to gain and keep victims within. So force can involve the use of physical restraint or serious physical harm. Fraud involves false promises regarding employment, wages, working conditions, or other matters. Coercion can involve threats of serious harm to or physical restraint against any person, any scheme, plan, or pattern intended to cause a person to believe that failure to perform something will result in serious harm. So think of it this way: coercion, I'm saying that this is going to happen. Don't tempt me this way. Force is the threat of it is actually going to happen. They actually are going to do it. And then fraud, self-explanatory. I promise to give you this for performing X amount of activities, but it doesn't happen. They just keep exploiting the individual that way. So this is our current legal definition. Sex trafficking is the recruitment, harboring, transportation, provision, or obtaining of a person for purpose of commercial sex act, in which the commercial sex act is induced by force, fraud, or coercion. However, we don't have to prove any of that for anyone involved under the age of 18. Child sex trafficking can also be referred to as child sexual exploitation, and it is one of the most documented and studied forms of human trafficking in the United States. These are just some of the places that it can occur for commercially sexually exploited of youth and adolescents in the United States. Each year, as many as 100 to 300,000 American children are at risk for being trafficked for commercial sex in the United States. The average age of a girl entering the commercial sex trade is 12 to 14, and for boys, it's 11 to 13. Labor trafficking is a form of modern day slavery in which individuals perform labor or services through the use of force, fraud, or coercion. There are several forms of exploitative practices linked to labor trafficking, including bonded labor, forced labor, and child labor. Obviously, it goes to the same thing with sex trafficking. If the individual's under the age of 18, we don't necessarily have to prove force, fraud, or coercion. Child labor trafficking is an often overlooked and misunderstood form of human trafficking. Labor traffickers use violence, threats, lies, and other forms of coercion to force youth and young adults to work against their will in many industries. And this also goes for adults within labor trafficking. We just don't have the same amount of research like we do with sex trafficking. Youth labor can look in many different ways, as ones mentioned up here. These are at-risk populations. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean that every mentioned group is going to become a victim of human trafficking. They are just at a higher likelihood of becoming victims of human trafficking. If you look at a good chunk of those, you could probably guess that a lot of those have a higher instance of adverse childhood events occurring. The exploiters, there's no one specific way that a trafficker looks. They exploit victims and profit from the labor or sex services they provide. Traffickers can be foreign nationals and US citizens, males and female, family members, intimate partners, acquaintances, and strangers. Often the traffickers and their victims share the same national, ethnic, or cultural background, allowing the trafficker to better understand and exploit the vulnerabilities of their victims. They use a multitude of tactics and techniques. Most of the time, they are going to look at obtaining a victim through what you could look at as low risk, high reward. So they're going to groom their victim. They're going to target somebody that has low self-esteem, any of those very specific groups that the vulnerable populations that we mentioned. They're going to start gaining their trust and creating a dependency. They're going to start feeling emotional needs. They'll start buying them gifts, showering them with attention, acts of love, wherever they're feeling a need that they're not getting somewhere from either family or friends, and any of that. Abuse will begin after the grooming process is complete. And then other things mentioned, so threatening to shame victims, that would be an act of coercion, physically restraining victims and restricting their freedom of movement, that would be force, using debt bondage, that would be fraud, isolating victims from family members and members of their ethnic and religious communities is a big one. They want to separate any ties of them from their previous family members, so it makes it more difficult for them to leave the scenario. and also obviously confiscating visas, passports, and other identification documents would be more for those of the culture, intimate partners and family members, labor brokers, factory owners and corporations, pimps, small business owners, and managers. Another thing that we would like to bring up is familial trafficking. Familial trafficking is the abuse and or exploitation of a victim at the hands of someone they know, usually a family member or another significant person in their household or family community. Familial sex trafficking specifically involves traffickers who sell victims for profit, giving offenders sexual access to victims or pornography in exchange for drugs, money, or something else of value. It has a commercial element to it. A child trapped in a trafficking situation could experience repeated, frequent, and ongoing abuse from which the trafficker will profit in some form. Child sex trafficking is always child sexual abuse. However, not all child sexual abuse is trafficking. The widespread adoption of various technologies has opened new avenues for traffickers and perpetrators seeking to sexually exploit youth and young adults. Recent research from the National Center for Education Statistics shows that due to school closures from the COVID-19 pandemic, youth in the US are spending 50% more time on screens. This increase gives nearly 750,000 sexual predators, traffickers on the internet each day, which has increased opportunities to groom and target vulnerable youth. So what apps are traffickers using? They're using any and all apps. They are looking for apps that have chat features, either within gaming or otherwise, and they're also focusing on apps that are designated as child friendly because they know individuals of a certain age will be going and using those apps. The National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, Cyber Tipline, is a national centralized reporting system for online exploitation of children. The public and electronic service providers can make reports of suspected online enticement of children for sexual acts, extrafamilial, child sexual molestation, child pornography, child sex tourism, child sex trafficking, unsolicited obscene materials sent to a child, misleading domain names, and misleading words or digital image. I do not have experience using this. Anytime I have a kid involved with any sort of abuse or neglect, I am usually calling Child Protective Services. If you suspect that child trafficking is suspected, you can always use the National Center hotline, which there is a slide included with in this presentation. Oh, look right there. So this is the National Human Traffic Hotline. Call, text, live chat, 24/7, 365, toll-free, confidential. You can make a claim. I really need to do this, but call through the process. I'm sure it's very streamlined in understanding that. So while each case of youth sex trafficking is different, there are certain warning signs that are common among victims. So risk factors and indicators of youth sex trafficking can include a history of childhood neglect, abuse, and or trauma, particularly youth sexual abuse. So this is going back to adverse childhood events, difficult relationships with caregivers, family history of substance abuse and criminal activity, involvement in abusive and violent dating relationships, being homeless and or a runaway, and then living in a shelter or a group home. Knowing peers or family members who are in the sex trade, brandings or tattoos, risky sexual behaviors, isolation from peers, friends, or family members, mental health issues such as depression, anxiety, PTSD, ADHD, and chronic stress. These are some questions to pose when assessing a possible occurrence. I would, no, there's a couple questions on the next slide that in being a teacher in your case scenario may cause the individual to be a little suspicious of why you're asking these questions. So most of these questions, I would start looking at an observation. So does the person show signs of being denied food, water, sleep, or medical care? This you can tell. Are they, a little bit thinner? Are they falling asleep more? Other things like that. Is a person often in the company of someone to whom they're deferring to, or someone who seems to be in control of the situation, where to go, who to talk to? Do they appear coached? So whenever I'm assessing a patient on the scene, I'm always going to ask the patient for them to answer the questions. I'll have family members jump in and try to add things, and I'll usually say, I will get to you. However, I would really like the patient. This is very important because you're giving control back to the victim so they can actually answer the questions, or you can start building a rapport with them. Is the person living in an unsustainable condition? Obviously, again, as teachers, it's going to be a little hard for you to actually see it. However, you can start, after you've built a rapport, you can start to gain insight that way. Does the person lack personal possessions and appear to not have a stable living situation? Sorry, guys. Does the person have freedom of movement? Can the person freely leave where they live? Are there unreasonable security measures? A couple more questions. Does the person appear disconnected from family, friends, community, organizations, or places of worship? Has the kid stopped attending school? Have they had a sudden change in behavior? Is the juvenile engaged in commercial sex acts? Do they appear disoriented or confused, showing signs of mental or physical abuse? Another thing you could keep in mind in adding to this is they might not know exactly where they are. They don't know what month, day, or year it is. Just other things like that. Does the person have bruises in various stages of healing? Obviously, that might be a little hard for you guys if, it's particularly like on the chest or the like upper thighs, because obviously they'll want to cover that up. So that might be a little hard for you guys to see that. Does the person seem fearful, timid, or submissive? This could be when you're asking very specific questions, or a very harmless question on, how's your home life? How's your mom and dad, etc. They could have a change in behavior that way. So in the state of Kentucky, we do have some anti-trafficking laws. Since 2007, the Commonwealth has bolstered its efforts to fight trafficking and address some of the damaging effects on its citizens in 2013 when the state legislature passed Human Trafficking Victims' Rights Act, the HTVRA, with bipartisan support. The HTVRA added several valuable tools to an existing cache of national and state laws meant to punish offenders and offer victims some amelioration of the pain they suffered at the hands of their traffickers. Kentucky became a national leader in highlighting and promoting victim-centered laws when it passed. At its heart, the Act's important safe labor provisions aimed at protecting children victims of criminalization and mandating services to aid their physical, emotional, and psychological recovery. I'm not going to read all of these, but these are some of the cases that might have elements of human trafficking. I would particularly like to point out prostitution charges, theft, human trafficking, code violations, delinquency, and juvenile status offenses, and then child abuse and neglect. The impact of trauma on a young person's brain development and behavior can affect communication skills, including ability to communicate feelings, emotional regulation, such as the ability to match emotion to a situation, executive skills, including organization and planning, as well as social skills, such as recognizing the impact of behavior on others. When these areas of functioning are challenged because of chronic trauma, it can further thwart a young person's ability to reach out for help and be identified as a person in need of help. Trauma-focused care should be prioritized. I also like to use the terminology patient-centered, victim, survivor-centered, any way you could put it that way. So emphasize lived experience and cultural and gender perspectives. For me, it's not, I don't have to prove anything. I just need to validate their experience in understanding what they're going through. Exhibit patience and empathy, be non-judgmental in all areas of communication. So be conscientious of language, customs, expressions, assumptions. Misunderstandings can often result to exacerbating victims' sense of isolation and potentially re-victimization. And re-victimization is just another way of saying you're causing another traumatic response on top of another one. Obviously, we can't always control because sometimes we may see a statement or a comment as harmless, but it may be traumatic to others. So we just need to be conscientious of the crowd and the people that we're around. Encourage victims to make choices at every possible opportunity. I would say this is probably the most important thing. Safety. Again, I use references to my job. So anytime I have human trafficking, sexual violence, domestic violence, anything like that, I validate that as long as you are in my care, you are in my ambulance, you are safe here, and I will keep you safe here. And then explain to them the next step. So when we get to the hospital, you know, there'll be people asking questions, there's security that can help keep you safe, and they'll help to plan your next steps if we've gotten to that point. Always be transparent and never promise things that you can't keep. Always for that person to separate themselves from a perpetrator. Collaboration and trust is at the forefront for court designated workers assessment and intervention with youth. Work with them. Again, as I mentioned, go at the victim survivor's pace. Resilience is highlighted in an empowering way. Applying your knowledge and understanding of the profound effects of trauma and violence on youth's relationships, behaviors, and multiple areas of development. Service delivery for victims of human trafficking in the United States is fragmented. Coordination and collaboration is gaining more traction, yet efficient and effective direct services exclusively to human trafficking victims is sparse in many states and regions. Once identified, victims will likely have their needs met in a variety of nonprofits, law enforcement officials, legal agencies, survivor-led organizations, and faith-based group and ministry. That's currently what we're working on right now. Our organization is really focusing on the education and awareness and providing a collaborative effort. So we're working with other organizations that could fill a need that we're unable to fill. And we're working and gaining traction that way. All right. Hopefully I didn't talk too fast, but this gives us enough time for sharing questions, any insights and challenges, and obviously the opportunity to talk that way. I'm going to stop the share because the only thing after
So this group has not been that talkative this week, but some of these health folks have been my biggest talkers. So if you guys have some questions or things that you would like to know, please, questions, comments, put them in the chat or actually speak them. It's good to hear people's voices.
I've included.
I'll start. Oh,
Excellent. Go ahead.
I'm sorry.
No, you're fine.
So from the health standpoint, we did the 2 days of like looking at health skills with the health teachers. And one of the things we talked about yesterday was health advocacy. And then of course the like personal health, those were 2 of our standards. I mean, really all the standards, but like, I guess my question would be, what can we do as secondary or high school health teachers, in terms of, addressing this issue with our students? Like,
So
as far as, I guess having them either advocate or just prevention. Like, I think we're more in the prevention. I don't know, somebody else jump in, but I'm thinking like, how can we get our kids to be aware? Because you hear a lot of things on the news. So like people share all this stuff all the time, like, oh, my kid, and I have 2 teenagers. So like my kids they're going to get grabbed off the street. That isn't really how it happens. I mean, and I think we hear a lot of parents like, oh, like my kids joke about the white van and all this other stuff. But, what are some misconceptions that we can share with our own children, with the kids that we teach, and being able to recognize maybe these things in their peers? Because a lot of times in schools, what happens is it's the kids that tell us things. And so hopefully you understand my question. I was kind of going around.
Yeah, no, I definitely got some of that. So what are you guys going over specifically in your body advocacy stuff? Because you just mentioned that, and I don't know, are you going over like consent, like boundaries?
Yes, boundaries, yes. So like, I think that was interpersonal communication.
Okay.
Nicole, Frank, Gina, you guys were there. Ernest, help me out with that, because we were doing this the other day, but boundaries, communication, refusal skills, all of those things.
I honestly keep that up. So I'm very frank and open. I am a survivor of childhood sexual abuse. I didn't realize what was going on to me until I was about the age of 10, and it had already been going on and off for about 5 years. So honestly, just keep that open lines of communication. Also really encourage the parents who are getting involved, that the taken scenario, the white van scenario, is incorrect. There, as I mentioned, the process for grooming, they're gonna find individuals that are very vulnerable, they're going to fill a need of any sort, and they'll start that process that way. I use the story of when I was roughly about 14, 15, I had somebody, my internet freeze. All right, did everybody hear me or did I freeze? Okay. So I use the example of someone in my church community had actually reached out to me online. I recognized the name and I'm like, all right, I'll add him. It's whatever. It was on, I think, MSN Messenger when that was a real big thing. And it started that way. He just, how's your day going? What do you like to do for fun? And different interests that way. One of those things to add in with the body advocacy stuff is if someone is reaching out to you online that is significantly older than you, that's not an appropriate relationship for anyone under the age of 18, period. It doesn't matter if it's benign or not. Because for me, I fortunately did not get into a scenario of trafficking. However, it could have very easily turned that way because he had built a relationship with me. We communicated. I eventually saw him at different church things. And eventually the things started to turn more sexual. And this individual, I want to say, was 20 to 25 years my senior at the time. So that would be one of those examples where it's it's not the white van or the taken off the street. Um, I feel like you had one other part to to your question besides the body autonomy and consent and the pulling stuff off.
I think in the chat, Nicole had put something about also social media, which is kind of what you just used as
Okay.
a personal example. And I think that's kind of where even as parents, we
Mhm.
go with that, because the kids are like, oh yeah, mom, I'm good. You know, or the kids are like, we know better than that. Yes, what could we do in our classrooms to help
Marian,
with that?
excuse me 1 second. You were saying something about refusal skills, no? And I think it's wonderful, the way we can save our children with those refusal skills, because they feel most of the time for peer pressure, they have to go
Absolutely.
to that corner, they have to do that.
Mhm.
It's everybody's doing that, I have to do it too. Talking about social media too. The the word is the the socialization. I don't know, the socialization problem. People are getting into social media all the time. People don't interact all the time like before.
Mhm.
But those kind of people, those sexual abusers, perpetrators, they got a special, stereotypes. And it's,
Absolutely.
they are so easy to recognize. It's super friendly. Maybe they don't have already an own family created. Most of the time they do too. It's difficult, but at the same time, I'm coming, for example, from a country with that's pretty sad. That's maybe most of the reason I'm here living in United States is that it was for my girl, my daughter. She was 3 when we moved here, and then I was seeing what was happening with the society and the young girls, and then a lot of tourists, coming to my country and getting relationships, all people, seniors, and things like that. It was really depressing. Okay, I can teach my daughter at home, I can teach my family at home, but anyway, the society, how the influence, the society is gonna do in their minds, and I didn't want that for my daughter and things like that. Thanks God, I feel more safe, here, where you got the right to at least till 21-year old people are considered like a kids, like
Mhm.
children. They got the majority of age in another, case for going to war, maybe, but it doesn't matter. At least for drinking alcohol and things like that, you got your own rules. But for not going too out of the conversation and the loop, I think we are so important, an important part in their life, because most of the time they don't have that big brother, they don't have that father or mother who can advise, and they got us, and,
Absolutely.
and we can be so important in their life and in this decisions they're gonna take. And my student asked me a lot of advices, girls, boys,
Mhm.
about a lot of things. And sometimes you feel you are preventing maybe a suicide. Sometimes you are discovering that someone is abusing that kid at home, and that's what made our job really incredible. A reason to go to work every single day.
Um, Absolutely. So I had a very difficult relationship with my dad growing up. So I was looking for paternal figures anywhere I could find them. So you guys are absolutely one of those people that you can build a relationship and a rapport with a student. So if they start showing signs of things because they trust you, you're definitely in a very good position to start building a relationship, start maybe getting some more information. So if you do make a report to CPS or the National Trafficking Hotline, you can have a little more information on stuff like that. To go back to the social media, I was one of those outsider kids growing up, so I definitely turned to online communities, and I still do turn to online communities. We just have to teach both ourselves and our kids how to be more digitally aware of what's going on online. So we have a digital safety module where we go over some more stuff, but things that could be recommended for you guys as parents or you guys as teachers is go over the apps every time there's a download with your kid, like review it, maybe check it out, look at your security features, make sure those are turned on. I'm trying to remember some of the other things that I have in my other presentation. Blanking on a couple of things. Security features. Talk about what is appropriate to share on the internet and what is not. We have to remind, obviously kids that are older, that any sexual image, even if it's shared between consensual dating partners, can be prosecuted. So that's one of those things that we really have to encourage, that you may be in a very safe relationship and it's something that you do want to do. However, being under the age of 18, it is still a crime. So we have to reinforce that, it's not okay to ask for it. It's not okay to share them, especially under the age of 18. And what other things can we do? One of the things that I notice a lot is, like, some family and friends are really excited to share, oh, my newborn was just born, here's the date that they were born, here's their full name. Like, that's a beautiful chapter in life. And I hate that I have to say this, but because you're giving very specific a full name, you're getting a birthday, it's going to be a lot easier for people who exploit kids, young adults and stuff like that. They're getting this information like right from your social media. So that's one of those things. Be conscientious of what you share on social media, because once it's there, it's always there. There's really no way to delete everything. Obviously with COVID, that made it a lot more difficult, where kids are being on school and things like that. But those are the things that I can immediately think off the top of my head to protect, you yourself and your kids, and then potentially other kids. As for validating some claims on social media, the Wayfair one is one that immediately pops to mind. And then other things like that saying, yes, this is what's going on. I use Snopes.com, if any of you are familiar with that. But you can type in and they'll tell you, yes, this is a validated claim. No, this is a validated claim. Or somewhere in the middle, like, we need more information and we're not sure about it. Obviously, the Wayfair was one of those discredited things. Another one that was popping up, I did some work with Mercy Academy, and some of the students were saying, if somebody puts like a honey jar on top of your car, that they were selected to be pulled off the street. And I'm like, no, this is my first hearing of it. Obviously, keep situational awareness. Be conscientious of your surroundings. Don't, be glued to your phone, facing a book when you're out and about in the world. That's something I try to keep in my own daily life, and obviously when I'm working, but something to also teach, you yourself and your students. Any other questions or any more validation?
I have just for teaching this, if you only had like a couple of days to teach something about human trafficking and warning signs and things like that, what are the specific things that you would definitely want to have in that lesson, you think?
To students specifically?
To students, yeah. If I was doing a lesson,
I would really enforce the consent and boundaries. Talk about how someone you don't know on the internet is reaching out to you and they're asking for very specific details, and you may or may not know them in real life. Obviously, people lie on the internet. I would add that in there as well. Like, very easily, if they have your name, like full name, they can look you up on social media. They can see, what family you have. So they could be like, well, I'm your Uncle Joe, and go along that way.
Yeah, would you put in there like stuff about how grooming happens and what to look for as far as somebody grooming you?
Yes, 100%. Because that's one of those things where they either use, especially if you're looking for something to fill, like for me, I had no like paternal figure to look up to. So I was looking for teachers, I was looking to coaches and other things like that. They're looking for a role to fill. Obviously, school is, for me, was kind of a sanctuary to get away from like stuff that was going on at home. So I would spend a lot of time at school. But for other people, they may not get to school. They may not have the opportunity to get away from what's going on. I hope that made sense.
Yeah, no, that's good.
What else?
Let me ask you another question.
You can teach red flags to kids, but the red flags are more for us as the observer in trying to, keep in mind. I think another important thing to maybe go over is understanding adverse childhood events. That'd be talking about any sort of abuse, any sort of neglect, and explaining that obviously what those things, the things that happen to you are terrible, and you're at a higher likelihood that if you don't deal with what's going on, it's going to get worse. I didn't deal with any of my trauma till about 22, 23. And I was to the point where I was having suicidal ideations constantly. I was extremely stressed out and anxious and depressed all the time. And I had big mood swings and stuff like that. But nobody ever asked me. So if you don't create an environment where it's just, if anything is troubling you or you need to talk about something, be that open space. Because no one really talked about it. Like my high school, I don't remember having any conversations about human trafficking, sexual abuse, or anything like that. So the fact that you guys are now having these conversations, you're going to start, having more pops of this, unfortunately, but I'm glad it's being done.
Regina.
Yes.
This is Ernie Neal. I realized what you were saying and how overwhelmed some of these young kids are.
Mm-hmm.
They're pushed, and they also are driven. They made to do such and such. But when we were talking about personal communication, I don't know if you can share anything about communication techniques, one to the other, to the perpetrator versus the male or female, and also talk about refusal skills, and how does that impact whether or not a conflict resolution can really be, I know it's a real high endeavor, but you got to de-escalate it somehow. You got to get that person to come back to reality, if you will. It's not reality, but it comes back to a standard that she can work within. And I don't know how we do that, in terms of the conflict resolution, or how to communicate the techniques to them, or what do you say to them about refusal skills?
I will say right now, confident students that understand consent, that have good boundaries, that have good relationships with, parents, etc., they will say no. If they are uncomfortable and they're like, I don't like this scenario, teach them how to block and report on the internet. Like on Instagram, do you know how to block this way? On Facebook, do you know how to block this way? On the flip side of that, it's a difficult question, and I don't know if there's like a one size fits all answer. My suggestion is start to build a relationship and build a rapport with a student. If they start to kind of let things slide, like, oh, I get hit sometimes at home, or my parents, make me work at the, the family restaurant really late at night, so that's why I'm really tired. Start noticing those things. And obviously, don't immediately jump out at them and say, are you being trafficked? Because a kid will retract and not want to share anymore with you. So go slowly, go at their pace, and ask very focused and student-oriented questions. So if they mention, oh, I've been working really late, the family business, well, how does that make you feel? That seems like it kind of sucks. Like, you're a kid, you should just be focusing on school or sports or, whatever that particular kid's interest in. And then see how they feel. Because eventually, if you start building this relationship, then it'll get easier over time for them to be like, I really don't like this, scenario of whatever it is, or this made up scenario of working in the family restaurant. That would be where you could start to kind of bring them back to, grounded. This is what a kid of their age should be doing, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. I totally agree with what you just said, especially, the relationship portion. But I'm a little bit, I'm thinking in terms, why would a kid, if they had a relationship with a parent, not want to tell their parents? What have you seen has been a real reason why they wouldn't tell an adult, that they would go with this cult, if you will? Why? I know the reason for money and, sex and a place to live and clothing and whatever, but why would they not tell their parents? Just basically don't have any relationship with their parents?
That I would 100% say yes, that is definitely a part of it. Part of the grooming process is taking the individual and isolating them further from family and friends, so they're made to feel like they can't come forward. I didn't tell my mom what was going on to me till the age of 15, and by then it had already been going on for about 10 years.
Well,
so you
never get over it,
I was made to feel that nothing was wrong. I didn't think it was harmful until I realized that it was. And then people are going to respond in two different ways. They're either going to internalize everything, which is what I did, and I didn't talk about it, or you externalize it. So you start maybe acting out. My sister was also a victim of our perpetrator. So she started stealing things from the store, like little things that you can put in your pockets. So it's little things like that. So as I said, I was 15 when I eventually told my mom what was going on. So that's not everyone has a good working relationship with their parents. I have a better relationship now with my father than I ever did when I was younger, but that's because we've hashed a lot of the things out, and the perpetrator was on his side of the family. So that's where you could fill the parental role, because not everyone feels comfortable talking to their parents on things, and not every parent has created that space where a kid can come forward. Like, I recently came out as pansexual and queer to my dad, and he's just like, why didn't you say anything earlier? And my response was, we never really made it feel like a safe environment for me to come out and say those things.
Do you think role playing, modeling, and coaching is a way to go with the kid that doesn't come out?
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
It's definitely an option. Just go with the kid's pace.
Yeah.
We have a session on role play later this afternoon.
Oh,
Yeah, I'll be there.
Any other questions or verification that you would like?
I'm sorry for the darkness here, but I'm taking care of the baby now. This is an important topic. I realize, someone in my family had that issue too, with another member in another part of my family.
Yep.
This is extremely serious. I'm still figuring out how I'm not coming back to Cuba to disgrace myself. I have to talk to myself a lot, a lot of conscience, and I had talked to my dad and things like that, because it's really disgusting, and when there are minors, or children involved, it's not easy. So if we can prevent those kinds of things, thanks to Regina and all her department, or what all that she does, and so we have to be aware and with our eyes big open, to see those signs in our children and our students.
Absolutely.
So, thank you very much. It's really
Yeah,
useful
absolutely.
information on everything.
This is the reason I share my story with such candidness and openness and honesty, because I'm a living, breathing person who can bring a very personal example of how this has been going on and how we can do things differently. Not every survivor is at this capacity to share. So if my personal example can give you an idea of, oh, this is possibly how it's going on, and can give you a better understanding of how to be more aware and stuff like that, then, you know, I'm going to continue to do so. What There's no right or wrong way to support your kid. And if they say something has happened to me, I wish my mom really pushed me into therapy when my sister and I first came out to when it was going on. That's probably the only thing that I wish differently. The other thing is, I wish we had told my dad sooner that it was someone in his family causing this. Because he actually responded in the way that we didn't think he would. He believed us 100%. The perpetrator had passed away a few years before we had finally told my dad, and he responded with, "I lost this family member twice." So now he is officially like, cut this person out. People react differently when they find out that their kid is being abused by a family member. It's just such a difficult thing to kind of grasp, especially because most of the time when a person comes forward with that, and they go to the person and saying, "Hey, my kid is saying this," the abuser is going to deny it or say, "Oh, that's not true. They're, you know, twisting what their experiences are." And it's up to you to be like, "Okay, well, you're not going to have any, you know, any role in my kid's life anymore, because I'm going to believe my kid over what you're saying." You have to believe what the kid is saying. It is not your job to verify the truth or, you know, create evidence. You are here to be a supporting role for your kid, because if you do it in this one scenario, then they know they can come to you for anything. In going further that way, I hope that made sense and verified what you had said. I got one head shake. Cool. Any other questions, comments, feedback? I'll take anything.
I had a question. Now, is all prostitution considered human trafficking or sex trafficking?
I'm in the category of no. There are individuals over the age of 18 who engage in sex work that is consenting. Obviously, there's, you know, the flip side of that. There are people who got into it thinking, you know, this is going to empower me, this is going to do whatever, and it ends up not being that. Or vice versa, where they started out as a victim and they end up becoming empowered because of the sex work. Obviously, this goes back to you go what the individual is saying, you believe what they are saying. Now, obviously, if they're starting to show signs of, you know, abuse, there's force, there's fraud, coercion, other things like that, then you're going to kind of be like, you're going to want to ask those questions like, well, do you really think that, you know, in a working relationship between boss and individual, do you think you're supposed to get hit? Do you think they're supposed to belittle you? Even, you know, as a paramedic, I'm going to tell someone to stop yelling at me or de-escalate the situation, because that's not appropriate. Or if my boss is yelling at me, it's the same thing. You know, that doesn't feel right. Or physically assaulting and other things like that. Makes sense?
Yeah. And
Okay.
the other question that kind of along the same lines is human trafficking, like, is all like, you know, people that are helping people cross the border and things like that, coyotes, is that human trafficking? Is that all, or is that even if it's consensual, even if the people are like, yes, I'm hiring this person, and they don't, like, you know, hurt them or anything, they're just getting them across the border?
That is 100% trafficking, yes. that goes a little bit further and more of a complicated scenario. So one study I read in Peru, this is within country, this is not necessarily individuals coming to the United States, but within Peru, in the outerlying, farming communities, they send, usually their daughters away to the big cities with their, aunts and uncles, like I call non-blood family aunts and uncles, just as a way to greet them, to work as domestic servants in the household. And, in exchange for X amount of time, they'll help them get their education, further them up, the chain and other things like that. But it ends up being where it's just the domestic servitude. They're not really getting educated, and other things like that. So that's an example of like in country, but obviously, given all the issues with the United States, we're still a lot better than a lot of other countries. We don't, have constant genocide going on. We don't have, genital mutilation in Africa, and other things like that. So people are willing to risk going, across borders to get to a place where they know that they could potentially be in a safe household. But obviously, as you said, that may not always be the case. They may get funneled into an even worse trafficking situation, or an even worse situation than what they were living in. But there are some people out there who are willing to risk that to get away from a very difficult situation. So unfortunately, there's no yes or no black and white answer for that one. It's very gray, and it honestly depends.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, it depends, because someone can pay, to a coyote or whatever to cross the border, and it's not the same when they kidnap, young girls from Asia and other places to bring in containers, to the United States. It's so different.
I know you guys are coming up. We're coming up on time, but you have about 3 more minutes. In the chat, I did put Path Coalition email and my personal email. So if you have any other questions, feedback, or anything like that, feel free to send it that way. So before I go, do you guys have anything else for me?
I have posted the validation question for you guys in the chat as well. This session has been so strong. I feel like it was so needed. Regina, we are so thankful that you gave us your time today and shared your knowledge with us.
Yeah, absolutely. Hopefully you guys got something from it, and hopefully I didn't go too fast through the presentation. So these were all really good questions. I actually like the fact that I kind of finished sooner, because then we can have more of a clarifying conversation on certain things. And I would 100% rather do that anytime. So you guys don't have any other questions, this little night shifter is going back to bed.